What is the organization that you work for?
It's nice to be here. Do your parents ever do these things to you? When we got here, he said, "I have a jacket for you to put on." So I knew I was in trouble when I saw the jacket. And I think this is so you'll listen if I have the jacket on. If I take it off, no listen. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you. Sorry, I'm shaking it. I've got Parkinson's for about 4 years now, so sometimes when I get excited, the body does its own thing, but I'm still here. It's still me. I work for World Vision, Dad.
I love you. I love you, brother. Thank you, Jeff. Tell me, I think they want you to use that microphone, yeah.
Hello.
How long have you been working with him?
It's going to be 20 years now. This next year it's going to be 20 years. Can I ask you one question? Have you ever had a son of Dr. Brown come to the service? You haven't had? Well, you know, when we were young, we were a family when we were young, they used to take us around because they were missionaries. And we used to have to come and give talks and so on. So this is not new for me. But usually it was us who were asked the questions, you know, did you see any wild animals and so on. And I'll answer your questions, but if I could just ask you a question first.
Me?
Wouldn't you rather find out something about him when he was a kid or something? I mean, what do you think? You know, World Vision, boring stuff, but something about Wes Brown, some inside story or whatever, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, how about wild animals? What do you think about something about wild animals or hunting or something? Or?
Oh, dear.
Now,
we have to go back to that.
How about, I believe when you were a young man, your parents were over there, and you were in the States, and then you went over when you were finished secondary school or something like that?
The end of secondary.
Now, that was quite a while back, you know. I mean, he was born a while back, you know. It makes me feel younger. Can you tell us anything? What about elephants or lions, or what do you think? Lions or elephants or tigers or lions? Probably lions. Any lion stories? Any?
Okay, I want to get back to World Vision, but I'll just brief.
If he doesn't tell it right, I'll fill in the part. Yeah, okay.
When I was 18, there were 3 man-eating lions that ravaged the area around where I was living with my parents. And finally, one night, the lions made the mistake of coming to the house of our mission hunter, who used to go out and shoot wild game to provide meat for the mission. And one night these lions were heard right behind his house. He opened the door. He had a hunter's light like that, and he shot one of the lions that went into the jungle behind his house. The next morning we were all called, and I was given my father's rifle, and we followed the trail of blood of this wounded lion. And of course we didn't know how far into the jungle it had gone. Well, to make a long story short, we penetrated the jungle following the trail. I was behind the major 2 mission hunters, and the lion, when we came close, roared, and we didn't know it was coming right at us, and I made the mistake of shooting. Fortunately, I didn't hit either of the hunters in front of me, but a little bit later they did kill the lion, and later the other 2 were killed. Anyway, let's get back to World Vision. Where have you served with? Pretty close. Yeah. Where have you served with?
I did meet one of the people that were on that hunting thing, and they when we went on the trip with the family, And one of these older gentlemen who actually knew my grandfather, which was rare, and he told me that they asked him to sort of settle down at that point and please don't shoot anymore. So anyway, okay. Okay. All right.
Where did you serve with World Vision?
When I joined them, I opened the Congo or the Zaire office. At that time, it was in a different part of the country than where we had been. It was in the south, and I was there for about 5.5 years, and then served as head of the Zambian office, and then was with World Vision Canada in Montreal, and then moved to the U.S. office about 9 years ago now. So.
And what has been now currently your major responsibility there?
We're still trying to figure that out. No, I'm over sponsorship, and the part that I play is the global planning and choices as to where the funding will go, what kind of projects will be funded, reports back to see if the money was used properly, and so on. So that's the role I play now.
Could you tell us something, for example, you served so many years in Africa. What is one of the major concerns there as it relates to children?
Well, it wasn't lions at the time I was there, but probably because I was in southern Africa, southern part of Africa, Zaire or Congo. You know, it's a huge country, and it starts in the northern part, goes from east to west and southern. And in the southern part in Zambia, probably HIV/AIDS would have been, one of the biggest problems. We were not really prepared, for AIDS when it came up, because it was thought to be something that is very rare. That's it's some oddity that you would get that, and it was of course generally a heterosexually transmitted disease there, and as well through lack of sanitary medical practice, and so we were surprised at how quickly it grew, and that was probably our focus.
Well, did you have any experience there where you found people that you knew who had AIDS, and what happened?
Well, in the office is the people you get closest to are the people you work with, in the work, and I remember around 1990 or so, we had a young brother of a staff member become ill and die, and it was some disease, pneumonia or something that didn't make sense for someone to die from, especially that young. You know how that is? And we thought, well, that's just a strange thing. And maybe a month or two later, there was another person that died, and then a wife of one of the staff members, and it started to become, and of course no one would say that they had AIDS, because it wasn't, at the church, it initially, thought, well, AIDS is a curse when you've done stuff wrong, and, it's God's going to punish you, and, it's your fault. And of course they learned over time that many people got AIDS without doing anything sexually that they shouldn't do, husband bringing it home to the wife, or some medical practice. I mean, even myself, I remember in Lusaka going to this is a minute only?
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. If you get bored, just raise your hand. I went to the clinic to get an inoculation. One of my shots wasn't up to date, and so I was there with the nurse, and she was getting the vial for the vaccination, and there was one of these white rolling, it's metal with a sort of porcelain cover, trays, medical trays. There's a round thing with 3 levels, and the top level had it looked like alcohol in it, and it had a whole bunch of needles in there, but they were the ones you usually use once and you throw away. And she was digging through there to try to find which one she was going to use to give me the vaccination. And of course I said, do you have any that are still in the package? Any of the And she says, oh, like frustrated with me. She says, this is alcohol, this takes so. I said, I'd rather have one in the package. And so she goes and gets one, and she's very frustrated that I would see a typical foreigner has to have this thing that's not really necessary. But when I walked, out of there, I thought, how many people would even know to say, hey, I don't want that? And so it's very easy to get AIDS there, and the prevalence was very, very high. And so we began to work both with the church and with our own projects to find what role we should have. I think in Africa, as it should be the case everywhere, the church should really play a role when it comes to the whole of life. Here I think we got things kind of worked out, taken care of, we think, anyway, and we have our garage door opener, our ways to 24-hour shopping, and we don't need people, and we got the medical care and so on. But there was no question that there was a need for each other, and that the church had a role when people were in trouble. And it wasn't only to quote verses, it was real practical stuff. And so the church really moved into a new place in terms of how they saw their role, and were able to be part of helping to minister to people affected. And a staff member, I one case, I knew he had 3 kids. And we visited his house. We were having some sort of a fellowship meal or something like that. We visited his house, and there was all these kids there. And I said, well, where's the parents of these kids? Well, we're taking care of these kids now. And I said, well, why are you taking care of these kids? Well, the cousin is here died, and this one died, and I was just like blown away that there was that many kids that needed help and were being taken care of in very few homes. So it's exciting to be part of that. There has been a lot of progress made, but it's a painful thing to watch.
How does World Vision respond to this kind of challenge?
Well, first of all, World Vision knows it's not everything, and it's not to do everything. It's supposed to partner with others. It's part of what is supposed to help to bring change. And so definitely we have a role to play, but we want to work with others, and the church, of course, is a key partner. But for World Vision, there's probably 2 areas that they focus on. One is, of course, people who are affected by AIDS. In other words, direct family members, children that have AIDS through the parents, and families that are having to cope with lack of resources, that have AIDS. And then prevention, probably that's the main focus, is the youth, and to understand and take away the fear and the ignorance. And there's a lot of different ways you can work with youth clubs and so on. And of course the church has a great role, because abstinence, there's a lot of biblical principles that would protect people from getting AIDS. Not 100%, but it does help them to be able to have a value system that would help them to be safe. And so that's probably the 2 focuses.
Could I ask how many countries do you have child sponsorships in?
Well, there's the U.S. office. World Vision is international partnership. So there's about 2 million children who are actually registered in a program around the world. We're about 900,000 or so of that, and we're in 49 countries from the U.S. side. And of course, the registered children are among the primary people who are helped, and their families, but they're not the only ones. It's trying to help the whole of the villages where they live. So that's the work we do.
Thank you, Jeff. This question, who are you really? My mind goes back to a marathon in the Olympics. I was a great admirer of Frank Shorter, who for a while held the world's record for the marathon. And I'm so admiring of James, who's run the marathon. There may be any other person here who's run the marathon in our congregation? Well, I remember particularly the 1972 Olympics, and I realize some of you here hadn't even been born yet at that time. But what startled me was very close to the very end of the race, with Frank Shorter in the lead, lo and behold, suddenly on that marathon route appeared another runner carrying the number, as all marathoners did, and was in the lead. And suddenly he was at the entry to the stadium. And he came into the stadium, and the crowd, I don't know, 100,000 or whatever it was in Munich Stadium, broke out in a tremendous cheer. Here was the guy that was winning the marathon. And the person on the television broadcast was saying, he isn't the leader of this marathon. He never ran it. He broke into the trail of the marathon because he wanted to get the applause of the crowd. And so here this guy is doing the final lap in the stadium, and everybody's asking, who is this guy? He hasn't run the marathon after it was announced. And finally they got him off the track, and before very long, here came Frank Shorter, as I recall, who won the race in near record time. Who are you really? Sometimes there are people that are phonies, that are hypocrites. In fact, years ago I remember when J.B. Phillips came out with his marvelous paraphrase of the New Testament, wherever the word hypocrite occurred, and you remember in Jesus' teaching it occurs many different times. Why? Of all of the people that Jesus criticized in his ministry, the people that most often get the criticism are the phonies, the people that don't really live what is in their hearts and put on a big front for others. We have to ask, who are you really? Are you one of the phonies that comes to church with a nice facade, but during the rest of the week your life is a garbage can? I don't know. I am challenged whenever I am tempted to realize that those of us who bear the name of Jesus as our Lord, when we go out from this place, we have an enormous responsibility. Who are you, really? Well, Paul, in this passage, I think, is dealing with identity. And he says that there are a lot of people who have criticized him, and he says, okay, you want to match up and see who has the best pedigree, who has the most outstanding credentials for faith. Okay, I can stand up against the best of them. He says, what are the things that he lists? He says, I'm an Israelite. I even know my tribal identity. By the first century of this era, a lot of people couldn't identify what tribe they come from. He knew he had come from the tribe of Benjamin. They carefully kept the record. He had been, as was obligated in Jewish tradition, circumcised on the 8th day when he was 1 week old. And then, not only did he have a tremendous ancestry that a person could be proud of, but also the way he had lived it up until the time that he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. This guy had sought to carefully follow all of the different commandments of the law and to be obedient to them. But something happened to him, something very dramatic that changed his whole sense of identity. During the time that he was trying to keep all of the commandments and be obedient to what he believed that God wanted him to be, all of that time, he was doing it to try to chalk up credit with God. You know, it's as if God had a big signboard here. And when we had the pluses and the minuses and the good things that you did, let's see how if they add up. And how about the negatives? Let's see how many there are. Can we, with the scale of justice, can we balance the two? Paul says, I kept all of those commandments. A little bit later, he was to write to the church at Rome and say, actually, that he did fail because he coveted. And that was the 10th commandment. That was the one that he failed on. But He endeavored to keep all the commandments, and it was as if he was trying to say, you know, when it comes to finally totaling up, will I have more to my credit so that God will bring me into His kingdom when I die? Will I be accepted in heaven? Now, there are a lot of people in our world today who, if you ask them who they are, would identify themselves with a variety of identifying marks. For example, we might say, identifier, tell me a little bit about you. In fact, one of my favorite things some of you have discovered on Wednesday nights is I like to ask somebody that I don't know really well, tell me about you. If I were to ask you this morning, who are you really? How would you respond? Some of us might begin, for example, by identifying ourselves in relationship to our family. Well, I'm a dad. I have 2 kids. And we might go on to identify ourselves by the work we do. In fact, one of the biggest problems that men often have when they come to the time of retirement, they are so shattered by the fact that their identity is no longer tied up with their work, that they have sometimes a very traumatic time because their identity has been so long tied up with their going to work and the job that they had, or perhaps the recognition that they had at the job. But when we talk about identity, some of us may proudly identify ourselves by our ethnicity. Somebody else may, by virtue of one's education, the degrees gained. And because I've been involved in theological education so many years, I don't disparage or minimize the value of one's pursuits in education, but perhaps there are some other achievements. In fact, this week I was going through one of my children's files, and we had kept all of the awards that Julie had won, all of those years through all her education. And it was interesting to see her looking through and remembering all of the achievements. Some of us have worked so hard to get ahead, to find acceptance. Paul came to a point in his life where he said, none of that is of any real importance to me anymore. He, we could say, moved on to the question of identity for him becoming other than all of these accolades that he could have listed and mentioned already, several of them. For Paul, now the most important thing in all of his life was his relationship with God, that had been absolutely transformed by his encounter with Jesus Christ. And when that happened, as you see, he had to sort out, who is it that I really am? For him, it was no longer a question of his Jewishness. It was no longer the pedigree, the ancestry. It was no longer all of these keeping of the rules, because he realized that wasn't the way he could find a positive relationship with God. It was only when he turned in utter and complete faith and trusted Jesus that God would accept him. It was that Damascus road that turned around his sense of identity. Who are you really? Today, I wonder how you best identify yourself. Is it by one of these things that we've already mentioned? Or have you come to the place in your life where your relationship with Jesus has become more important than other things, than any other things? Did you catch the words of that wonderful song that Louise sang a few moments? All that I held dear counted on, everything that was precious to me. I've come to the place where that's no longer of any importance. In fact, Paul says it's like so much trash. It's not important to me. I have put my faith not in all of my accomplishments or the so-called good things that I have done, but my faith now is in the one who died for me, and my longing is to get to know Him better, so that I can be more and more what He wants me to be. Do you have that desire in your heart and life today? You say, well, how can I know Jesus? You know, it's almost 2,000 years ago that He died. Paul talks about it in two terms. Did you notice that? He says, first of all, that, come to this next part, experiencing what he wants to do is